My name is Kajari Sen, and I would like to welcome all of our eminent panelists and, of course, the students of Bharatiya Vidyapeeth who are joining us today, as well as anyone else who's been kind enough to be present for what I am convinced is going to be an incredibly engaging and, most importantly, informative session on what the future of criminal justice is going to look like. Before I talk about exactly what it is that we are going to be doing today, I'd like to throw a couple of pieces of information out there. On September 14th this year, there was a shocking case that took place in Hathras. Everyone talked about it across the country. But it's only the latest in a number of high-profile cases. In 2012, there was the Nirbhaya rape case. In 2017, there was a rape in Unnao. In 2018, in Kathua. In 2019, a rape and murder in Hyderabad. These are the cases we talk about. These are the cases we hear about. However, there are thousands, tens of thousands, almost, I would say, hundreds of thousands of cases which are taking place, which go undiscussed, unheard, and very often unconvicted. A woman is raped, according to the latest data available, every 5 hours and 10 minutes in Delhi, which means that in a day, there are approximately 5 rapes taking place in our country's capital. If we look at all India, those numbers stand at 88 rapes a day. These are only the rapes that get reported. They are possibly a negligible number of the number of crimes which are committed against women across the country on a daily basis. To make that statistic even more shocking, out of the rapes that are reported, only 1 in every 4 gets a conviction. There are multiple reasons for this, including several social and psychological issues that come into play. However, one of the most significant reasons is the fact that very often there is not sufficient evidence for a crime to be pinned onto the perpetrator. Now, when we look at evidence and we look at the development of evidentiary sciences over the last century and a half, from the fingerprinting, which started, in fact, very interestingly, the first fingerprint case took place in India itself before it was popularized by the Scotland Yard in England, to various other kinds of sort of analysis that has taken place in forensic evidences. DNA is probably the most definitive. It is a unique physical identification. And rape is one of those crimes where inevitably there will be a physical identifier left behind, and tragically, violently so. The question is, how can we make these technologies available? How can we make these technologies foolproof? And how can we inform the people around us that these technologies can and should be used to ensure that justice is served? That is why we are here today with, as I said, a panel of experts who have been dedicating their lives to trying to ensure justice and are here to talk about how to take it to the next level. But before we go any further, let me quickly hand over this to Arnita, who is with us right now. And Arnita is going to be talking to us about what this campaign is all about. Arnita?
Great, wonderful, and thank you so much, Kajori. I think I would like to kind of firstly, thank everybody who's here from Bharatiya Vidyapeeth College and the Indian Literary Society. I think it's wonderful for you to make time. I'm sure this is going to be a productive discussion for everyone. So let me tell you a little about our journey and how, as Ogilvy, which is a marketing communications network of WPP, how we were introduced to the subject, about 4 years back when we learned about the power of DNA and how that makes it world's best crime fighting technology. So as we learned more about this, and as you just heard Kajuri talk about, the significance of DNA, and as we learn more from the experts over here today with us in the panel, I think what's important for us to know is the level of awareness around the use of DNA, not just with the people from the law enforcement and from the forensics, who most importantly, or let's say, are the first line responders or the critical responders to a crime such as any heinous crime, and in fact sexual offense and rape being one of the burning issues for us in our country. It's equally important for the common people today to know about the power of DNA and how this can be applied to solving a heinous crime, and not just solving the crime, but I think also deterring the incidents of rape. So the more and more we apply the scientific approach and use of DNA in a rape investigation, in a case like rape, I think the success of quality conviction is what we, I think, should be looking to kind of achieve. And that's where our campaign actually talks more and more about the role of the common people and what they should know about the very basics of what to kind of save as evidence, what accounts for biological evidence, the physical DNA evidence that can help build conviction conclusively in court. That's something that we have brought together in our campaign, and through various knowledge sessions and activations where we are engaging youths more and more. I think this message is something that is getting amplified, and we're seeing some very visible results, in terms of, firstly, the DNA testing, which has gone up, not to the extent that it should, uh, but we definitely do see some visible improvements. And I have to kind of say that, we are also hearing from sources that there is a kind of reduction in the backlogs. So that's something that I would want you to kind of really take away from this session in terms of a message which is very important in the current scenario. And I think it's very important for us to be looking at deterring the incidents of rape. So with that, let me also present to you a short video, a short film, which we have brought together, that will give you an overall recap of what I just kind of took you through.
There is renewed outrage in India over a series of brutal rapes.
In India, 4 rapes are reported every hour, and just 1 out of 100 cases leads to a conviction due to lack of evidence. The most conclusive evidence is the rapist's DNA. But awareness of DNA is very low in India, and its collection a massive problem. Because in India, the woman who gets raped is shamed and considered dirty. She is asked to immediately cleanse herself of this sin by her family. She's washed, her clothes are cleaned or burned, leading to loss of crucial DNA, even before she goes to report the case. To fight rape, we needed DNA. And for DNA, we needed her to stay unclean. So we launched the DNA Fights Rape, Save the Evidence campaign. We started by creating a Don't Wash, Don't Clean t-shirt to show how crucial it is to save the DNA evidence in a rape case. Top influencers wore this t-shirt and spoke about it. The word spread soon. Police officers, lawyers, and forensic experts came forward to create awareness about saving DNA. Even the additional Solicitor General and the UN representative for women in India joined in. To aid convictions, we partnered with the Indian Police Services and the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and conducted DNA education and training programs on how to collect DNA samples from a crime scene. In just 6 months, saving DNA has become a huge conversation in India, leading to landmark results. Post-introduction, the motion in favor of passing the DNA profiling bill in Parliament has gathered steam. Don't wash, don't clean, save the evidence is on its way to cleansing a nation.
There is renewed
Well, so that, of course, was an overview of the campaign itself. Before we go any further, I would like to very briefly inform our audience. We know and are aware that this is an extremely sensitive and often triggering issue. If you need to walk away and take some time for yourself, if any of these scenes you feel are disturbing to you or any of the topics we discuss are disturbing to you, then please feel free to do so. Self-care must come first. Now that we've mentioned that, I'd like to thank Arnita for introducing the campaign. And without further ado, let's get down to the meat and bones of what it is that we're going to discuss today. And first of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Vivek Sahajpal, who's the Assistant Director of the Himachal Pradesh Forensic Science Laboratory. Dr. Sahajpal has worked very closely and for a very long time in the area of forensic sciences, and specifically when it comes to DNA testing. Dr. Sahajpal obviously is an expert in this area, and I think looking at the discussion that we're going to take forward, it's important, if not imperative, to have an understanding of what DNA analysis is, how it works, how it's analyzed, and how it can help in addressing certain key evidentiary issues in the context of sexual offenses. So without further ado, we will introduce Dr. Sahajpal and then let him talk to us and really set the scene for the rest of the discussion.
A very good afternoon to all of you.
किसी ने देखा नहीं, किसी ने चीख नहीं सुनी, यही सोचकर तो एक रेपिस्ट खुले में घूमता है। इतना घिनौना काम करने के बावजूद उसे कानून का डर ही नहीं होता। कौन रिपोर्ट करेगा? उसके खिलाफ क्या सबूत मिलेगा? लेकिन सबूत हमेशा मिलता है। इनफैक्ट वो खुद उसे छोड़ के जाता है। उसका अपना डीएनए। डीएनए यानी आपकी बॉडी की वो यूनिक पहचान जो आपकी बॉडी के हर सेल में मिलती है। आपके खून में, स्किन में, बॉडी फ्लूइड्स में, नाखून में, थूक में, बाल के एक एक स्ट्रैंड में। अगर आप कहीं भी होते हैं, उठते बैठते हैं या किसी चीज को छूते भी हैं, तो आप वहां अपनी मौजूदगी की एविडेंस छोड़ देते हैं, जिसमें डीएनए एविडेंस भी होता है। हर इंसान का डीएनए उसका अपना यूनिक होता है, एक्सेप्ट फॉर द केस ऑफ आइडेंटिकल ट्विंस। सबसे बड़ी प्रॉब्लम यह है कि हमारे देश में रेप के साथ सोशल स्टिग्मा अटैच्ड होता है। बहुत से केसेस अनरिपोर्टेड जाते हैं, और अगर रिपोर्ट हो भी जाते हैं तो देर हो जाने से एविडेंस डिग्रेड हो जाती है। एडवांस कंट्रीज में डीएनए की नॉलेज होने की वजह से एविडेंस टाइम से कलेक्ट हो पाती है। इसके अलावा एडवांस कंट्रीज में क्रिमिनल डीएनए डेटाबेसेस हैं, जिससे क्रिमिनल को रिपीट ऑफेंस करने पर डीएनए की मदद से बहुत आसानी से आइडेंटिफाई किया जा सकता है। दैट्स द पावर ऑफ डीएनए टेस्टिंग। इसीलिए इसको हर रेप केस में करना आवश्यक है और इंश्योर करना है कि एविडेंस सही तरीके से कलेक्ट हो, तभी रेपिस्ट कांपेंगे कोई भी गलत काम करने से पहले। DNA fights rape, save the evidence.
Dr. Sahajpal, the floor is yours.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you so much. Is my presentation visible too?
It is.
Okay, fine.
Dr. Sahajpal, would you like to put this on full screen?
Just about to put it. Okay, so we'll talk specifically regarding the use of DNA profiling as far as the sexual assault cases are concerned. And in addition to that, while discussing about the cases, we'll also try to address some of the issues which come in the field of DNA profiling as far as the Indian scenario is concerned. So if you talk of the field of DNA technology, we know that's a very well-established science, and it's also considered as the gold standard as far as identification from biological evidence is concerned. However, there are immense issues that need to be addressed specifically with regard to our country. So if you talk basically of DNA, there are the four important characteristics which we can consider as far as the forensic DNA profiling is concerned. So first of all, one important thing is the DNA profile of each person is unique, except for the case of identical twins. Every person's DNA is same in every cell. So every cell of a person contains the same DNA, and individual's DNA profile remains same throughout his life. It will not change with time. Finally, half of our DNA comes from our parents, one side from the mother, another side from the father. So that becomes the basis of the paternity testing. So as such, if you talk of a DNA profile as such doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. So that also addresses the basically the issue of privacy, which comes as far as the DNA data banks are concerned, criminal DNA data banks are concerned. So what happens over here is the DNA profile, basically it comes from the non-coding DNA, non-coding human DNA. So as such, a DNA profile will not tell anything about your physical being. The only thing it can perhaps tell is that about the gender, whether male or a female. It will not tell what race you belong, what color you belong, what is your health condition, nothing. It will reveal nothing regarding that. And so basically, as far as the forensic science of DNA is concerned, it is science of comparison. So until unless you have a DNA profile to compare with, the profile as such means nothing. So in a case of sexual assault and murder, if you get a DNA profile, so until unless you have a suspect to compare it, a DNA profile of a suspect to compare, the profile as such means nothing. So further, there is also sort of wrong notions about DNA, that people think that DNA have answer for everything. DNA has answers for everything. But basically, we need to make the things very clear. As far as the DNA profiling is concerned, the results may be of three types. So it can be an exclusion or no match. So if you have a DNA profile, it doesn't match with the profile of the question samples, or there's a no match. The second condition is the match or an inclusion, where the two DNA profiles may match. So these are the two important scenarios. And third important scenario is an inconclusive result. So many times what happens is, like you talk of a DNA which is a mixture of more than one person, or it's a complex mixture, achieve something like that of a touch DNA. So in that case, suppose if I want to profile from a door handle of a bus or something like that, so from that I'll get a very, very complex profile. So it is very difficult to interpret that. The results may be inconclusive, because the results are so complex, it is not possible to resolve them. So as far as the application of DNA technologies, it can be used for basically for crime investigation, for comparing the evidence from the crime scene with the suspect. It can be used for the establishing paternity or maternity. Then in case of mass disasters, and it's also in case of soldiers' remains. So I'll discuss some important crime cases, so where we can address the issue, what are the specific issues as far as DNA profiling with respect to NDR. So in 2012, a teenage girl, she went missing. And after 2 months, police get some intelligence that she was last seen with two boys. Those two boys are rounded up and they're interrogated, and they confess to sexual assault and murder. And they also reveal that they murdered the girl and later they buried her in a cowshed. The body was exhumed, and during the postmortem, during the autopsy, it was revealed that she was also pregnant, and a fetus was also removed from the body. And the idea of DNA for establishing the paternity of the fetus is the first idea that comes into the mind of a criminal investigator, or in the case of a DNA expert. So the fetus was sent for DNA profiling, but unfortunately, the fetus was preserved with formaldehyde. So formaldehyde is a preservative which is not recommended as far as the preservation of sample for DNA profiling is concerned. And this is sheer ignorance and nothing more than that. So a simple case turned out to be a very, very complex case. And despite a lot of R&D and of man hours and time which we invested into this, we were not able to see any results in this case. So this is one scenario where a crucial piece of evidence is just lost because there is a negligence in preservation of a sample, or ignorance regarding the preservation of sample. Now, similarly, it also throws out very, very complex scenarios. So we got one more case in which there was a case of incest. So in this case, products of conception that were sent for DNA profiling, and normally one would believe that these products are these are of fetal origin and would for say random samplings, because there was more than 20 small pieces over there for DNA testing. So just by random sampling, we chose about 3 to 4 samples, and we conducted the DNA profiling, and we found that the DNA profile which was coming from this, it matched only with the victim. There was no content of fetal origin. So instead of doing that DNA profiling from coming to a conclusion just based on those 4 samples, we rather went for testing the more than 20 small pieces, and we found out of those 20, one piece was of fetal origin, and from that we were able to fix the incest case, and in this case the father was the accused, and it proved out to be a truth. And so random sampling also does not work in case of DNA profiling. So these are some issues which are related to sampling. So further, one very important, rather one most infamous case which took place in Himachal Pradesh. This case was a case of blind rape and murder of 2017. And this case, a teenage girl was found raped and murdered in a forested area. Her body was naked, and there was various statues of maggots which were visible on the body. And the only conspicuous evidence which were visible to the victim was a bite mark on her breast. So ideally, the bite mark should have been swabbed and submitted for DNA profiling. However, in this case, the bite mark was not swabbed. In this case, what exactly they did, they used a swab that was dabbed in saline, that was moved over the bite mark. The sample was collected onto that swab, and then later on, that swab was dabbed onto a FTA card. So evidence which was already in very, very low concentration, that is spread onto a large surface area, then again spread onto a FTA card. So ultimately, the evidence gets highly diluted. More the sample is diluted, more difficult to get the DNA profile. And there was also a matter of time lapse in this case. So this was the FTA card which we received in this case. So normally in case of DNA profiling, you might, the technology involves removing a 1.2 mm punch for DNA profiling. But in this case, we modified the technology. We tried to extract the DNA from the entire sample. And because of that, we were able to witness success. So we got a DNA profile, which was a mixed profile, which represented the victim as well as the accused, the perpetrator of the crime. And similarly, we also did the YSTR DNA profiling, from which we got only a single profile. So most likely it was clear, it was apparent that there is only one perpetrator in this crime. But during that time, meanwhile, because the media had portrayed the case as a gang rape case. However, the DNA profiling, it indicated otherwise, that it's not a case of gang rape. And there was another evidence which was found over there, that was an empty liquor bottle. And this liquor bottle was again swabbed. We got the DNA profile out of that. It was the same profile which came out of, which was same to the profile which was of the male, which was found from the bite mark. So this is the profile which we got from the glass bottle. It's a clean profile. So similarly, we got some more profiles from from her clothes. But however, we were not able to get profiles from the vaginal swab because samples were not collected properly, and there was also issue of maggot infestation. So, as I told you previously, this case was portrayed as a gang rape case, but DNA profiling indicated otherwise. And similarly, the YSTRs also indicated the presence of only one person. And now, in this case, because this was a blind case, so it was very difficult to find out the person who committed the crime. And normally what happens is police these days heavily relies on the cell phone dump data which is available in that area. So if the criminal is not using a cell phone, then how will you trace a person? So ultimately in this case, the YSTRs were used, and based on the YSTRs are basically lineage specific, male lineage specific. They were able to narrow down onto a lineage, and finally, it was possible to identify one person based on the YSTR marker and testing with the DNA profile of the mother of the perpetrator in this case, because he was not available for testing, he was absconding. So this is another important issue, like in case as far as DNA profiling is concerned, so there is certain types of pressure. You have to give the report within 30 days or 20 days or 15 days. So that is sometimes not desirable. So in 2015, there was a case where a teenage girl was sexually assaulted in a hotel room, and the incident was reported after more than 2 weeks. So the victim came after more than 2 weeks. Hence, the possibility of getting DNA profile from her vaginal swabs or from her body parts was near to impossible. The only evidence which was available in this case was bed sheet which was removed from the hotel room. So as far as the biological evidence goes, because in India we have a very set pattern that first of all sample goes for biological examination to detect whether semen is present or not. So now if you talk of biological examination, you have a bed sheet which is about say 2 meters by 2 meters, and that on that there's a conspicuous stain available. And on that stain is tested for biological examination to see whether semen is present by the presence of spermatozoa, and the result comes out okay, semen has been detected on the bed sheet. But if you talk of a bed sheet of a hotel room which is of low budget or a guest house or something like that, the bed sheet may not be removed for a few days. And in this case, because the victim came after 2 weeks, so bed sheet is collected after 2 weeks. So if we assume that the bed sheet was there for 2 weeks, the possibility of n number of people using that bed is there. So there may be n number of people who occupied that room, and there is a possibility there may be evidence available, biological evidence of n number of people available on that bed sheet. So simply by looking at the conspicuous stain and profiling it will not lead you to something. So when we conducted the DNA profiling from that conspicuous stain, we found that it is not matching with the accused. So one can shut the case there, it's not matching. But actually that could have been counterproductive. So what we did is we went back to those n number of possibilities. We screened the entire bed sheet and we found there are several stains over there. And when we profiled all those stains, so we got profiles of more than 4 males from that bedsheet, and from one inconspicuous, very small stain, we got a profile which was a mixed DNA profile, which represented the DNA of the accused as well as that of the victim. So in this case, we were able to give a biological evidence based on DNA that accused and the victim were there, and the victim was assaulted because this was a stain which was of seminal and vaginal secretion origin. So one has to be very, very careful in this regard. And similarly, in certain cases, because DNA is not about conviction, it's also about exoneration. So certain times the the version which is given by the victim may not be a young girl. She was sexually assaulted, and for 5 days she didn't identify anyone. No one was identified for 5 days, and finally, at that time in 2009, we didn't have a DNA profiling facility over here. So in 2010, again case came back for DNA profiling when we started the went afresh, and if they could witness it. So witnessing the test is not possible because it is a technical field. So layman may not be able to comprehend the results of DNA profiling or the process of DNA profiling. So in RTA also, we also informed them that this can be again tested subject to the amount of evidence available. And when finally the High Court gave orders that he handed over the case to CBI for DNA profiling because the family suspected that the DNA report was incorrect. And they suspected that the sample had been changed by the police. So again, this time the police collected the samples again, and it was through videography through proper documentation. And the evidence was sent to the CBI lab for DNA profiling, and ultimately the same results came back. It was negative results. It was not matching with the accused. And the real accused has not been traced till now. And the profile is still lying with us. The real accused has still not been traced. The real perpetrator of the crime, that's the right word, is not been traced till now. And maybe when we have a criminal DNA database, there is a possibility that that person may be traced and identified. And within the same year, we got a similar case. The modus operandi was similar. There was a young girl, this time a 10-year-old girl, who was sexually assaulted, and we got the same profile again. But till date, the person has not been nabbed. We have the profiles. As I previously told, the DNA profile as such means nothing until unless you have something for comparison. And if we have a criminal DNA database, then possibly several of such cases will be cracked in India. So there's further one more important thing about the importance of the DNA report. So in Criminal Appeal 620 of 2015, Honorable High Court of Himachal Pradesh appreciated the value of such scientific evidence despite victim turning hostile. There are several cases, in cases of POXO also, then the victim is turning hostile, the prosecutrix is turning hostile, and she is claiming that nothing has happened. Similarly, the family is also saying that nothing has happened to her child. So in this case, the High Court observed the positive DNA report stands corroborated with other circumstances. So the DNA report and the corroborative circumstances are sufficient to convict the accused. So the court also takes cognizance of DNA evidence, and there are conviction based simply on DNA evidence, even if the prosecutrix is turning hostile. So this is one more important case which I would like to discuss. In 2016, this is a case of a sexual assault and murder of a school teacher. A school teacher didn't return home till late in the evening, and in the search that ensued, her body was found in bushes barely 15 meters away from the trail which led to her house. So the house was barely 600 meters away from the main road, and there was a trail which led to her house, and her body was barely 70 meters away from the home, about 15 meters away from the trail which led to her house in a bushy area. So the first suspect in this case was the brother-in-law of the victim. So because he had some scratches on his face, and those scratches he got when he entered that bushy area to recover the body. So DNA profiling exonerated that person, the brother-in-law of the victim. Then the second suspect for the police was her husband, because he was on 2 days leave. So again, we did the DNA profiling, he was exonerated. And then the third level of suspicion went on the teacher, onto the students. And those were also exonerated based on the DNA. And what happened in this case, because we don't have a criminal DNA database, so there was no possibility of searching for someone. And it was basically searching for a needle in a haystack. It was just basically hit and trial. So scene of crime examination was done. It was found that from the trail to the spot where the sexual assault and murder took place, there were no drag marks. For 15 meters, there were no drag marks, which indicated the person who committed the crime, he was physically very, very strong. He was able to lift the victim clean off the ground, take her to that point 15 meters away without dragging her, and he was strong enough to muffle her cries without letting her scream and let people know that she is in trouble. So police was asked to look for such a person, and they looked for several people, but ultimately tested more than 40 people. None of them matched. Fortunately or unfortunately, one girl in that area, she came forward and complained to the police that someone tried to overpower her. And police immediately sprang into action, and one fellow was nabbed, and his sample was also sent for DNA profiling because the modus operandi was very much similar. And his sample, it matched. It matched with the DNA profile which was obtained from the vaginal swabs of the victim in the rape and murder case. And when his past was scrutinized, it was found that he was basically recently released from Tihar jail serving a 7-year sentence. And this person was not an Indian national, he was basically from Nepal. And had he left the area where this crime was committed, because just 5 kilometers away, another state starts, and similarly, one side you have Uttarakhand, then you have Haryana, and then if the person had left Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, reached Nepal, then the possibility of searching that person was impossible because the jurisdiction changes. The jurisdiction of the police changes, the jurisdiction of everything changes. So this is something very important as far as DNA database is concerned. If we had a DNA database, this person would have been surely apprehended. And similarly, the blind rape case which I talked of earlier, we found out later on the person who was found in this case, the perpetrator, he had previous history of committed crime where he had severed the thumb of one woman. So in that case, he was somehow let off. So if there were a DNA profile and a searchable DNA database, then these cases could have been cracked very easily. And the amount of money and investment of the public machinery, the official machinery which is invested in searching for a person, that can be saved. And similarly, the public resentment can be saved, the hue and cry can be prevented. So it is very much necessary that we have a DNA database. So like the code is of the USA. So one small thing about Another important thing like which I would like to convey to the society as in general is that normally in our society, what is the problem is, first of all, the victim doesn't come out and report the case. Second thing is the society also prevents the victim from doing so because the society tries to shame the person, tries to convince the person that there is no use going out for seeking justice, and it's better to keep quiet, and otherwise you'll be shamed by the society. That attitude has to go. It has to go. It's high time that should be shut. And as far as the victim is concerned, first important thing for the victim is do not wash or clean. Your body contains and your clothes, they contain a vital evidence which should be preserved for DNA profiling. Do not change the garments. Report the case immediately to the police. And with passage of time means degradation of vital evidence which is present on your body and on your clothes, that is degrading with time. Everything degrades with time. So the most important is that you have to report immediately so that the samples get collected from you immediately, and those go for DNA profiling at the earliest. And the society should support the survivor in all possible ways. And there's another thing is protect the scene of crime, because one very important thing, the scene of crime has to be protected, because we have seen the scenario is such that the media, the society, the localites, everyone is interested to go inside. And even I'll say to certain level, many times the investigation agencies also, they also try to create a hype and get the media in. That should be avoided until unless the scene of crime is thoroughly processed. So this was something which I wanted to convey regarding the DNA in a nutshell. I hope I have been able to convey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sehpal, for taking us through that extremely exhaustive and informative sort of walkthrough about what DNA is, what are the limitations of it, but also how it can literally, in some cases, save a life and ensure justice. We're going to really take that as the point on which we take our discussion forward. Let me very quickly introduce our panelists. I've already, of course, introduced Dr. Sehpal, who just spoke with us. Dr. Sehpal is the Assistant Director of Himachal Pradesh Forensic Science Laboratory. I've also introduced Arnita Vasudev, who's the National Head PR and Influence of Ogilvy India. We also are fortunate enough to be joined by retired IPS officer Keshav Kumar, who is the former Director General of Police and the former Director of the Anti-Corruption Bureau of the Gujarat State. And we have Senior Advocate Vivek Sood of the Supreme Court and Delhi High Court with us. We also have a counselor, a therapist, Kamal Manvani, who is joining us today. So we've got this incredible panel to talk us through all of the advantages, challenges, question marks around DNA as far as ensuring that justice is given to rape survivors and rape victims, as well as ensuring that this leads to a greater degree of prevention. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. It's wonderful to have all of you with us. To our audience, I would like to remind you that you could put all your questions in the chat box, and I will try to get as many of those across to our panelists. I also would like to request you to make use of the following hashtag. At the end of the day, this is a campaign where we're all coming together to try and inform as many people as possible about what we're trying to do here. The hashtag is DNA Fights Rape. The following social media handles can be tagged if you're putting it up on social media: Twitter at Where's the DNA, Facebook Where's the DNA, and Instagram Where is the DNA. Please spread the message far and wide. So as I said, I'm going to pick up where Dr. Sehpal left off with that sort of bucket list that he ended on. And I'm going to, let's talk through the processes of DNA collection, DNA analysis, and the kind of import or significance that it holds in court. And I'd like to go to Mr. Keshav Kumar first. Sir, you've had an extensive experience. In fact, even in the earlier days of DNA experience, you were a part of looking at one of the first cases ever which used DNA evidence as far as sexual assault was concerned. What is the responsibility of the law enforcement when it comes to collecting and storing DNA evidence?
Actually, whenever the offense takes place, the first thing that is a first responder must do is to reach the scene of crime immediately. That is the first thing. Thereafter, the second thing is to sanitize the scene of crime. Unfortunately, in India, this is seldom done. And all sorts of people will keep trampling the evidences. They won't realize that, basically they are destroying the evidences. So, after this sanitization and after the coming at the scene of crime, the first thing would be to look for the evidences. What are the possible evidences at our command? And I can tell you with my experience, not only in handling rape cases, one of the most important rape cases that I handled was in the year 2004 in Ahmedabad, when gang rape took place in a hotel room. And the scene of crime was a small hotel. And as Dr. Sehwal also mentioned about the bed sheet, the entire room, bed sheet, pillow cover, each and everything had been removed. And we reached there after about 4-5 hours. The blankets, it was in November, it was in December, 31st of December. Each and everything, the clothing and all, each and everything was removed from there by the hotel people, and they locked the room. But now it is the incisive probing nature of an investigating officer. And this is where I create a new word called creative forensics. And I see each and every investigation as making a film, a very, very creative exercise of crossing the boundaries of your thoughts. What could have happened? If that thing is in your mind, I'm sure you will have the eyes to look for the small pieces of evidence. And in this particular case, the first responder which reached the scene of crime, they were able to get only 4 or 5 pieces of evidences. And I was not satisfied. So with the entire forensic team, we were in the room. The room would be about, say, 8 feet by 10 feet, or slightly even more than that, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, a very small room. And you will be surprised to know that after 8 hours of rummaging the scene of crime, that was the only scene of crime that we had. After 8 hours of sustained rummaging, we closed the light, used the fluorescent light and all these things, we were able to get 54 pieces of evidences. Now, you just think over getting 4 pieces initially, and thereafter, when you rummage the whole thing, then you get to know about 54 pieces. Now, the bedsheet was changed. It was taken to some other place. The blanket was changed. It was taken to some other place, and they burnt it. But I said, well, they cannot possibly get hold of the mattress. The mattress won't have been changed. And as luck would be, when we subjected the mattress to investigation, umpteen number of evidences came to our light. And ultimately, we scooped from mattress. So, the first thing is to look for the evidences. We got the pubic hair from the wash basin pipes, because they had used a shaving razor. We got a razor. From there also we lifted the evidences. So long and short of it, what I mean to say is, this is a distilled wisdom that I have gathered over the years of handling very, very difficult cases. The scene of crime आपसे बात करना चाहता है. And with my experience, I can say, whenever I have visited the scene of crime twice, thrice, 4 or 5 times, every visit, I have been able to get an additional piece of evidence. So, I would like to stress that one has to speak to the scene of crime. And when will you be able to speak to the scene of crime? When you visit the scene of crime. If you don't visit the scene of crime, and if you're sitting in the AC chamber and trying to direct investigation from there, I'm sure the scene of crime will not speak to you. So the first and foremost thing is spend as much time as possible at the scene of crime. Look each and every piece of evidence that can possibly be collected. Third, you must have a dedicated team of forensic experts. Because I can use my knowledge, yes, this could possibly be a piece of evidence. If a forensic expert is with you, then he may do a presumptive test, like you get some blood stains. It may not be blood stain. So now if you are investigating, we will collect that blood stain, so-called blood stain. But after being subjected to the forensic lab, it may be known that it's not a blood stain, it's not a blood. So if a forensic expert is along with you, the full team, then they can immediately conduct the presumptive test and they say कि नहीं साहब ये blood नहीं है और ये चीज नहीं है. So you're on narrowing down on important evidences. So the third thing which is of most importance is the synergy between the investigating officer, the victim, and the forensic scientist. If we all work in a coordinated fashion, I can assure you that not even one accused can go scot-free. So these are the first responders thing, the synergy between the forensic expert and the victim and the investigating officer. The other thing that I would like to stress here is that, you know, police is not competent and not experienced enough in collection of evidences. So in rape cases, the first and foremost thing is about the forensic nursing, when the first medical evidences are collected. So, you know, the police will take to the medical examination room. So the medical experts, they also need to be trained for forensic nursing so that they pick up the best pieces of evidence and they know what to preserve, how to preserve. You know, we are not like, you know, Dr. Sejpal also mentioned that fetus of the boy, fetus that was found, that was, you know, preserved in formaldehyde. No, I'm sure if that would have been collected by a forensic expert, I'm sure he would have never kept that sample into the formaldehyde. The police doesn't know all these things, and especially in such investigations, very few senior officers actually visit the scene of crime. And the person who visits for the first time, maybe a constable, maybe a head constable, he is the first responder. So if he is empowered, if he is trained properly, I'm sure the collection of evidences can be of far better quantum compared to, you know, slip-out investigation and the delay in collection of evidences. So, you know, these are the things that I would like to stress in the initial phase. Now you may pose other questions.
I will take what you've said and hand it straight over to Dr. Sehajpal, because the stress that Mr. Kumar has just put on the synergy between the police and the scientists. What are, for forensic scientists, the challenges that they face as far as DNA sampling is concerned? And of course, as far as general training, access to technology, sort of availability of resources, different kinds of terrains, different levels of knowledge in different parts of the country, knowledge and expertise. What are the challenges you face that doesn't yet allow for those synergies to perfectly take place?
Fine. There are several issues. So if you talk of as far as
seem to be having some technical trouble there with Dr. Sehajpal's connection. We will try and get him back as soon as possible. But while we wait for that, let me go over to Mr. Sood. Mr. Sood, I'm going to actually go to you with a couple of the questions that we've got here in our chat box, because at the end of the day, the police has done its job, and then the scientists have done theirs, and then it comes to you, and it is your job to ensure that justice is served in the courtroom. There's a question here which is asking, when it comes to issues of fake allegations, there would still be DNA present. How do you weigh evidence in the courtroom?
That's a very, very interesting question. So DNA evidence is only one piece of evidence. See, DNA evidence does not prove forcible sexual assault. DNA evidence is an identifier of an individual at a certain place. So DNA evidence, being one piece of evidence, cannot conclusively prove a case of sexual assault. So the defense of consensual relationship is available to the accused, but the defense of denial is taken away. So let us understand the importance of DNA evidence it is a very significant piece of evidence, but not conclusive to convict the accused. Because all defenses are available to him under the law. But as a corroborative piece of evidence, if other circumstances are present, then it can become the most important piece of evidence also. Now, for example, I was speaking to a friend who happens to be a sessions judge, and he told me a very interesting case. He said, the daughter had accused the father of rape, and for some reason, the daughter turned hostile in the court. But still, I convicted the father because of DNA evidence. Okay. Now, secondly, in cases of rape against minors, where consent is no defense, there also DNA evidence will become conclusive. If a minor was to accuse somebody of sexual intercourse, consent is not a defense. So there again, it becomes a critical piece of evidence.
Right. I'm just going to, since you've mentioned hostile witnesses, and given the fact that statistically we are aware that a significant amount of sexual assault in India happens within the family unit, it happens with intimate partner violence. Kamal, I want to just come over to you now. And I mean, this is at the end of the day why we're here, to allow people to know what they can do to ensure that justice is available to them and to their loved ones. Socially, what are the issues that you think that people who have survived rape or people who have loved ones who have survived rape need to be aware of to ensure that DNA evidence is preserved?
Kajori, that's a very, very important question that you have put. It is DNA, saving the evidence, reaching out to the authorities, all comes at a later stage. The first thing that comes is whether people are reaching out or not. And there the mindset plays a vital role. That narrative in the society needs to change. That belief system that something is wrong, calling a person who's gone through rape a victim, that is what needs to change. That person has gone through a bad experience, and we need to change that experience for that person, for everybody in the society. So that needs to change. How first responders perceive a rape case. When they feel that yes, they can do something, they have to be trained there that there's nothing so wrong there. It's a bad experience. It's an unfortunate thing that has happened, and you can support the person who's gone through it. The entire belief system needs to change here, and it needs to start at a very young level, and not only to empower the people, but also the offenders can be reduced by changing the mindset in the society, because at times this is the wrong channelization of their anger or frustration, which leads to raping somebody. So that also needs to be addressed. So this all needs to get woven into the education system right from the beginning, in not thinking that, okay, we'll tell them once they reach college. No, even when they're not aware of this, even when they're very young, in the primary school itself, these seeds can be sown that yes, there is something we need to do more about it. The belief system of the society needs to change. Then only this thing can really become effective. And we will not lose any time after rape. Reach out to the right authorities.
Right. And of course, the sort of social understanding of it becomes a critical part of the larger processes, as it does in the police and in the courts. Now, I'm going to quickly go back to Dr. Sejpal and throw a couple of the questions which are coming in on the chat box. Dr. Sejpal, Ishika is asking, how long are evidence collection here? How basically, what's the time limit for evidence collection and analysis? You did say these are time-sensitive issues. So how time-sensitive?
So basically, if you talk of biological evidence, the body itself starts cleansing itself. So as far as the literature says, a spermatozoa can be detected in a vaginal cavity up to 128 hours. So that roughly turns about to five days. But practically talking, so detecting a spermatozoa may not lead you to the DNA profile. Because if you talk of DNA profiling requires a certain quantity of DNA for DNA profiling, say 100 or 150 picograms of DNA. One cell contains 6 picogram of DNA, and one spermatozoa is haploid. That means only 3 picogram of DNA. So detecting a spermatozoa may help you to find give an opinion that okay, semen has been detected, spermatozoa has been detected, but it will not help you with respect to DNA profiling because you are getting only the haploid amount of DNA, only the half amount of such 3 picograms of DNA. So as such, for the technology which is available, so you require about 30 to 50, about 50 picograms of DNA to get a good profile. So what we see is in cases where the victim reports early, say within 1 day or 2 days, then the possibility of getting good profile is very, very high. The third day, fourth day, the chances they get less. And after fifth day, chances are minimal, fine, for getting a DNA profile. But whereas the garments which bear the profiles, if they are preserved, they can have the DNA for very, very long time. The best example, if you talk of the Monica Lewinsky case, so where the garments were presented after a long time. So if the watchword over here is desiccation of the sample. So you don't require refrigeration. If the sample is desiccated, dried, it has the evidence for very, very long time. So even after years also you can get a DNA profile. And but as far as the biological evidence from the body is concerned, the victim has to come forward very quickly. And as far as the evidence from clothes and other at the crime scene is concerned, those things should be preserved. Like they should not be, like clothes should not be washed or anything, clothes should not be changed. They contain the evidence.
Right. Let's quickly, I'm so sorry, Anita.
Just to quickly add to what Dr. Sejpal is saying, there have been examples for that matter, cases of exoneration, acquittal, of after 30 years of imprisonment. So there are such cases. And all that matters is how you handle and preserve the evidence, which can, even after 30 years, can get you the acquittal only on the premise of DNA testing. To quote,
well, Anita, I would like to add something to that. So this is something like akin to the Innocence Project, which is running in the US and other countries. So what happens is, as far as sample preservation is concerned, see, we have very important issues. So previously my link was snapped. So whenever a sample is collected by the medical officer, a vaginal swab is collected. So it is in wet condition. It has to be desiccated to ensure that the DNA in it is preserved. So the desiccation is not done. The doctor is following the protocol of collection and packing the sample and forwarding it properly, sealing the sample and sending. The chain of custody is maintained, but the preservation of sample is not done. It has been collected. The sample requires desiccation. It requires a desiccant along with the sample so that the sample remains dry, and when it reaches the lab, the content is intact. So what we witness is a sample like our state, it has almost all types of climates. Like it has the hot weather in Una and certain parts of our state. So at 40-degree temperature in summers, a vaginal swab is collected. It is packed in a tube, in an airtight tube, in wet condition. It reaches the lab after 5 days. So what you will get? You will get fungal growth on that swab. So you'll be getting DNA out of it. It will be more of DNA of non-human origin, of bacterial origin, and fungal growth. So that is basically destroying the evidence. So it is very necessary that a standardized protocol is applied across the country for collection and preservation of sample. We have seen directions from the MHA coming in the direction, but still we see that it is not being implemented at the grassroots level. So in 2018, Honorable High Court of Himachal Pradesh summoned me in one of the cases that what should be the process for collection and preservation of sample. And we had given those protocols and recommendations way back in 2010, but still we see the implementation is not there at the grassroots level, though we are trying to sensitize the issues. Now the High Court has also passed those directions that these protocols need to be followed as far as the collection and preservation is concerned. But still you see, what is the problem is we don't have a dedicated staff for all these things. So a medical officer who is posted in a remote area, he comes across sexual assault, he's asked to collect and preserve a sample. And he might have done forensic medicine, say 15 years ago, 10 years ago. He is not well versed what is to how the samples are to be collected. He tries to do the best, but basically he doesn't have the technology at his disposal, and this knowledge needs to be brushed at that time. So what we require is probably a dedicated cadre of nurses just for examination of sexual assault victims, of rape survivors. And then once the samples comes into lab, then the thing is good, fine. Now, beyond the lab, once you have done the testing, the exhibits, we are the custodians of the exhibits till the time they are with us for testing. Once the testing has been done, again it goes back to the police, it goes to the court for prosecution, they're presented in the courts, again it goes back to the Malkhana of the police. The Malkhana of the police is not having refrigeration. So if you think of having some running like something like an innocence project, someone wants to get himself exonerated with the help of DNA, 10 years, 15 years. After 10 years or 15 years, those samples will be in highly rotten condition, infested with termites. That will be the situation. So that thing is also to be looked into as far as the Indian scenario is concerned, if you want to run something akin to that. So these are some of the problems which we need to think of.
Right. There's a question here that I'm going to quickly take to Mr. Kumar. Mr. Kumar, Sahib Gupta is asking, I think essentially what Sahib's asking here is about false accusations. It's very easy to get traces of DNA of a person. It would be very easy to plant that. Yeah. And how, as an investigating officer, would you be wary of those pitfalls?
Yeah, actually, when we investigate a case, the evidences that you have been collecting, they are leading you to a certain direction. Now, with regard to the issue that whether it is planted or not, then this is not a forensic investigation. It is your human intelligence. And for developing this case in this direction, whether it was planted or not, there are many other psychological methods of investigation which can be used possibly to come out at a conclusion whether this was planted or not. And there would be a host amount of circumstantial evidences. If you are able to break the entire investigation into small components, I'm sure they would be standing by each other. So it's not that it is not difficult to prove that whether it was planted or not. It can certainly be proved. But the only thing is that the investigating officer will have to use many other methods of investigation, not necessarily DNA in this particular thing. So this can be found out, and I'm very sure that it can be found out. In a couple of cases, I have myself proved that, yes, this is a planted thing. So it's not a difficult thing to do.
So you're working obviously as an investigation as a larger process.
I would like each one of you to see investigation as an ecosystem, as a full thing. Don't see small parts of it. And when you are developing an investigation, you are getting so many evidences which are not necessarily connected with DNA. There are so many other secondary evidences which would be adding up to the entire ecosystem of the investigation. There may be a handwriting, there may be suppose there is some suicide note, that in the case of Bijal Joshi gang rape case, there was a full suicide note. And that was a very good piece of evidence. In addition to that, the DNA evidence was the most clinching one. But we had a number of other evidences to support the case. So we should not only depend on only DNA. Yes, that is the gold standard. It is a certainty of conviction. But at the same time, we should also look after other material pieces of evidences that we are getting. Like in this Bijal Joshi gang rape case, the blankets were burnt and that belonged to the room. Now we have to prove that, yes, this burnt blanket is the same blanket which was found in the hotel. And, we did the fiber testing of that and we were able to prove, yes, right, the ashes of this blanket are basically same, that old blanket. So it is not DNA, but it is some other physical evidences which we are trying to pull in with our evidences. So, you have to see it as a whole thing in that. I hope I answered the question of Sahib.
Absolutely. I think that is very comprehensively answered. There's a question here from Rahul Tripathi that I'm going to throw to you, Mr. Sood, because very importantly being pointed out, the DNA is still a supplementary evidence. How can it be made a part of main evidence, and what kind of amendments in the law is required? And I think we can use this as a segue to also talk about the DNA bill. Mr. Sood?
Yeah. Okay. I would suggest to the policymakers that collection of DNA evidence should be made mandatory in all police investigations, in at least to start with the sexual offenses. Okay, now we have the law in CRPC that DNA can be even, reasonable force can be used to collect DNA evidence. But I would suggest, some kind of an investigation manual or maybe an amendment could be brought into the law, which says that DNA collection of DNA evidence in homicide cases and sexual assault cases, which is the subject matter today, should be a mandate, because that process of these tools, reaching the police stations in the interiors of the country is a challenge. May I just cite an example? If the declaration of 66A being unconstitutional has not been able to reach the police station even after 5 years. It was declared unconstitutional in 2016, a singles case. If that cannot reach the police stations in the smaller parts of the country, so DNA evidence will take about 50, half a century. So let it be the letter of the law. Let us not depend upon, the wisdom of the IOs, in smaller parts of the country. And let me tell you, the police, the moment you sensitize it, the moment you make it a law, the police does perform. It's in spite of a lot of challenges. In the police men do perform. It's very unfairly said that the police is doing shoddy investigation. The kind of challenges they face are not easy for the IOs. But I feel that there should be a mandate in the law.
And yes,
can I,
yes, Mr. Kumar.
I was just wanting to elaborate upon what Mr. Sood has said. He has said that, DNA should also be used in homicides and other cases. I mean, just for the sake of the audience, I was talking about creative forensics. I also talk about fusion forensics. Now, there's some new words that I have coined. Now,
Mr. Kumar, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? Because I would like you to include two of the questions that have been asked here in your answer, because I can see you're going there. The people saying that can DNA be collected by first respondents from other sources? We've talked about vaginal swabs, and Dr. Sajpal has gone into a great deal of detail, but nails, if someone has scratched them, non-penetrative sexual assault, all of those things. So if you could just also bring that into the larger forensic net when you discuss it.
Like, I'm sure when the rape is taking place, it's a very heinous and a very gruesome sight to see. And also, there would be some amount of fight by the victim. Now, the first fight is through the nails. So there are a very good number of possibilities that, you can get nails, nail marks on the face, on the body, and those things can get entangled inside the nails. And I have read in one of the articles that from the nails, the DNA, if there is any remnant there, DNA can be extracted even after 40 days. So if you are able to collect the nails by taking the hand wash, this is one. The other thing is there can be number of fibers, like, the clothes of the victim, the clothes of the perpetrator. There would be exchange of fibers from that. That could be one piece of evidence. Nails are the biggest piece of it. You can also get strands of hair. You can possibly get some saliva. There can be a bite mark. You can go in for forensic odontology and get to the crux of the thing with the bite marks. So it's not that you're not going to get evidences. You're going to get n number of evidences. What I always mean to say and stress is that you need to have that eye for collection of that evidence. And you need to have conversation with the scene of crime. Only then the scene of crime will speak to you. Yes, please. And I can tell you, when I investigate cases, मेरे को ऐसा लगता है कि वो scene of crime जो है वो बोल रहा है कि साहब आप ये देखो, आप ये देखो. But that can only happen when you are in sync with the scene of crime, not inside the AC chamber and issuing notes to the subordinates कि तुम ये करना और वो करना. No, that cannot be the good part of investigation. Now, coming to other thing that I was just wanting to dwell upon from where Mr. Sood left. He said about the forensic evidences of DNA they should be made mandated for homicides. You know, you will be surprised to know that I was the chief of the Anti-Corruption Bureau of Gujarat State for 4.5 years. Before that, I was joint director CBI in Mumbai. And when I took over here in Gujarat, you know, I used DNA technology in a trap case. Now, you know, I'm sure it would be music to so many people. Okay, trap case mein, how can DNA be used? You know, now I'll tell you the story, how creative and how you can see beyond the boundaries and be creative about it. Now, you know, the person who had accepted the money, when we went to recover that money, we could not find that money. It was not found on the ground, in the chair, on the table, in the drawer. Each and every conceivable place was found out, but it was not found. So I asked my inspecting officer who was doing the search there, मतलब भाई उसी आदमी से पूछो कहाँ है पैसा. बोलता साहब वो हमने क्या कर रहा है वो. बोलता साहब कुछ नहीं करता वो, साहब कोने में चुपचाप बैठा हुआ है. And you know, this word कि साहब कोने में चुपचाप बैठा हुआ है, that gave me a thinking कि कहीं इसने मुंह में तो नहीं रख लिया है. And you know, finally we opened the mouth and we got 20,000 rupees rolled from his mouth cavity. अच्छा, now you know my conventional thinking कि साहब हमने फोटोग्राफ ले लिया, पंचनामा के समय सारा सही करवा लिया, बहुत अच्छा कर लिया. But I used always to think how you can value add to the forensic evidence. So I said, why don't we go in for DNA fingerprinting? Because the saliva content on the notes, that is obviously his saliva. And if we go in for DNA, it will be finally nailing him. And the same thing happened. We conducted the DNA test on those currency notes, and you know, the obvious had to come. It came that the DNA on the saliva, on the currency notes are his DNA. Now, I would like Mr. Vivek Sood to kindly appreciate this particular piece of evidence during the investigation. So, you know, don't let DNA only be for this particular purpose. You can be as creative as possible. And what I personally feel, what is DNA? DNA, it is a GPS. वो आपका GPS है कि yes, आप वहां पे थे, आपकी DNA वहां पे है. तो इसे जियो लोकेशन. You can't dispute that. Now, additionally, if you have some technical evidence like mobile phone, उसका tower location लीजिए, तो उसका tower location भी वहीं आ रहा है. So, you know, you are trying to give support to the investigation through other evidences also. In addition to the
गाड़ी तो आपको ही चलानी पड़ेगी.
Yeah. So, you know, what I mean to say is कि you know, पूरा investigation जो है ना एक बहुत ही बड़ा creative exercise. The creation of your mind कि कितना आप सोच सकते हैं, कितना विचार कर सकते हैं. So I hope I answered the question of Mr. Tripathi.
So we've now got a question here from Ayush Nath Jain. Kamal, I'm going to hand this over to you. And Arnita, I'd like to actually hear what you want to say about this as well. Ayush is asking, how do you make people understand this when they believe that the victim is impure and should let go of things, clothes, ornaments, hair too? How do you deal with people who think that way? And Kamal, if you talk through the sort of the psychology of it, and then Arnita, we'll come to you to talk about what awareness can do for it. Yeah, Kamal.
Yeah. So Ayush, why do you think Arnita is calling us all and reaching out to students like you? You know, you are the change agents of the society. We can bring our experience, we can bring our knowledge, but we need the youth power of the country to change the belief system that exists in the society. You know, these mindsets are social constructs. We need your support to challenge them, to change them. You know, there is one thing called as the ultimate reality, and there is something which is an individual's reality. Make it simpler, like if I ask in which direction do you see the sun first in the morning? Every single person in the on the earth would say east. So that is the ultimate reality. There's no challenging that reality. But if I ask how are mornings, each person would give a different answer. Mr. Sood would say they are very pleasant, and Mr. Keshav Kumar would say they're the most exciting part of the day, and somebody would say, oh, they're so lazy, that's the most lazy part of the day. So that is individual's reality. So the perception about rape, the perception about how the victim has to be treated, this is a society's reality, which the society has created. And we always have the power to challenge it, to change it. And I think you, the youth of the country, has the power to actually drive that change. And that is why we look forward to you and want to get connected with you.
Pranitha?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And Kamal, that's so well put. The whole idea is that we need to change the narrative from victim shaming and blaming to putting the accountability on the perpetrator, right? And how does DNA then come into picture, by the way? So the idea of talking about DNA here is that since this can, prove to be one of the most conclusive evidences in a sexual offense and rape cases, since this can actually build most conclusive conviction in court, it's a very powerful weapon for us with which we can battle rape, right? And if we can do that, it through awareness, the more awareness that we create of this particular weapon of DNA, I see this, being able to put the fear of law in the minds of the perpetrator. So doesn't that then work as a deterrent? Doesn't that work as a deterrent with this kind of burning issue of rape that we have to tackle with? So on one side, we are talking about, the science of it, which is DNA and the scientific approach and how this can be a crime fighting weapon and how that can actually deter the incidence of rape. Should we be able to demand more DNA testing? Now, who's going to demand the DNA testing? The demand has to come from people like us. The more oblivious we are to what can work scientifically, the more we are actually kind of let's say fueling the issue of rape in our country. You cannot only pin this down to law enforcement and you cannot pin this down on the forensics, because at the end of the day, when a crime like rape happens, we as common people have to reach out and be able to save that evidence. Somebody asked, that what accounts for that evidence. Any bodily substance, any bodily fluid, like Mr. Keshav Kumar just kind of talked about, certain evidences that could lead to DNA forensic evidence. Now, in a case like rape, just imagine. I mean, do you expect witnesses to be around? You don't. A crime like rape doesn't happen in with witnesses around. The chances of eyewitnesses are very minimalistic. Only thing that you can rely on, which is the scientific truths, and is that DNA evidence that you should be looking out for. And so what happens in a rape case when you wash that out, unknowingly, unintentionally, you as a survivor, as a victim of such a heinous crime, don't realize given the trauma, and you tend to wash that off, or your family, friends are not around you to advise you correctly in terms of how you should basically be able to save that evidence. This is what we are talking about, right? And how one thing leads to another. So there is a component of the scientific truth that we are talking about, DNA, and how that can deter crime, and the other about the change of narrative, because DNA can help that. It can drive that.
Right, we are closing in on the end of time, so I'm going to take two last questions, one for Dr. Sahajpal, one for Mr. Sood. Dr. Sahajpal, I'm going to come to you now. There's a question here which asks, what are the margin of error in DNA evidences in sexual assault cases?
Well, if you talk of the margin of error, as far as sexual assault cases are concerned, so DNA technology as such makes identification 99.99, which is near to absolute. So it's very much established science. Only thing is probably, which I can theoretically assume, is like if you have two identical twins who are accused, in that case it will be difficult as far as DNA is concerned, because we can't distinguish between two identical twins. But if you still talk of that, there are other corroborative evidences available, as Mr. Kumar also said. Martha already said that it's not only the DNA evidence, you also have the other corroborative evidences available. And as far as the DNA technology is concerned, like the technology for distinguishing between two identical twins is also in the making. So there's a phenomena called as DNA methylation, which progresses with age and environment. So through that, you can even distinguish between two identical twins also. So that technology, that science in the form of technology may be available in coming years. So that issue can also be addressed. So as far as there is no pinpoint, but I can give example of my state. Like we started the technology growth about a decade ago, but at the moment, like perhaps we have the every technology available. So normally, like most of the labs at the time, they are doing the capillary electrophoresis for identification. That's the most common technology which is used at the moment. So we are also into the next generation sequencing. So recently we also acquired a next generation sequencer, so that very few labs have. So in that case, we can even handle very complex mixtures also, or highly degraded DNA samples also. So, and in this case, the help from the side of the central government, the Nirbhaya Fund, it has been instrumental. And because we got this infrastructure added to our infrastructure augmented based on through the Nirbhaya Fund. So, and another problem which was the number of experts available for testing cases. The number of experts is also very less, and the supporting staff was also very less. So again, here Nirbhaya Fund came to our rescue, and we have like a couple of fellows who are young MSc pass outs who are working as assistants with us, and they are helping us a lot in cases. So in that scenario, one thing more is happening is like when we are hiring these people, maybe through outsourcing or DNA testing. So in that process, we are also creating a trained manpower. We are also training them to handle cases. So these fellows, once they get into regular jobs and all those things, they'll be a great asset for the country. So because you being a huge country of population of more than 1 billion, you definitely require a huge number of experts. So the situation is improving. The Nirbhaya Fund has been very good. There has been sensitization also regarding with the for the society, for the investigation agency, for the judiciary, for the prosecution. So I even appreciate the role which is being played by Ogilvy as far as highlighting this issue is concerned. So as such, the infrastructure is not up to the requirement, but it's steadily improving, what I feel.
Right. Mr. So the last question, I think for this particular discussion, then we're going to have to wrap it up. There is a question on the admissibility of DNA constitutionally speaking. There have been concerns, not just in India, but globally, about privacy, about taking DNA samples from suspects who turn out to be innocent, about the possible creation of a DNA database. Constitutionally, where does DNA stand?
Okay. Again, a very, very interesting question, very challenging question. And, I have dealt with this issue in my upcoming book on the right to privacy that is likely to be released in October. But definitely creating a database, in my view, raises issues of, constitutionality in terms of the right to privacy, which has been now read as part of the right to life and liberty guaranteed under Article 21 of the Constitution. And, there are very interesting articles. And, I think it's a treat to read Puttaswamy 1 and Puttaswamy 2. And, especially if you read the dissenting judgment of Justice Chandrachud in the Aadhaar case, where, where these concerns of privacy, especially in the developing world, especially in the third world, these are major concerns. But then, we have other problems to look at, alleviation of poverty. You need the Aadhaar card for A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z things. So privacy becomes secondary in the developing world. But if you read the case law in the European Union and other parts of the world, the developed world, any form of creating databases, they have been rendered unconstitutional. But in India, we'll have to follow different set of rules. We have a different set of problems. We have a different society. We cannot import those principles blindly. Individual rights have their own significance in the developed world. They cannot be applied ipso facto in a developing country like this. But definitely, in my view, creating a database of, DNAs of citizens does raise privacy concern. Now, what ultimately our Supreme Court will decide in our setup, that's a question mark.
Right. Arnita, let me very quickly.
wants to add something, and we must hear him.
We will.
must
We
hear
will.
him.
I will come to
He's
you. I will
brilliant.
come to
He's
you. I
brilliant.
will come to you, Mr. Kumar. I will come to you in a moment. Arnita?
Yeah, so talking about the DNA bill, well, I must mention that the monsoon session is on right now, and this matter is being pursued. It's being discussed very actively, and the position right now we are in is that standing committee had raised certain questions. Those are being responded to. We are just hoping that we see the light of the day, because there are over 70 countries today, globally, who have adopted the DNA offender database. And what that really does is essentially helps you track repeat offense, which means you don't spend that much. And you heard Dr. Sehjpal say that quite a few times. He stressed on this point that if he had a DNA database, we could have tracked that person very quickly, because we would have had that person's profile in the database. So you don't go after a wild goose chase, right? Every time there is a crime that happens, you start right from the beginning and going after, trying to identify, who the suspects are and who you can really go after, right? So that's talking about the DNA technology bill. If that comes through, yes, there are questions on privacy which came up, but a lot of it has been, Vivek, a lot of those questions have already been addressed in the parliament. Talking about, the privacy issues.
I just want to add one point. I'm not against the data bill in toto. I'm all for a data bank. If a blind crime, if a blind murder, a blind sexual assault case has taken place, lift the DNA, keep it in a bank. But to say, all suspects, all citizens, all groups, all people of a certain tribe, all people living around the highways that go to, Hapur, and all people, living in the villages in UP. So that kind of a general databasing, I am all for privacy and the fundamental right to life and liberty. So we can't see, to crack crime, you can't have the big brother watching you all the time. The best way to track any crime is to have the big brother watching you all the time. Do we want a state like that? No, I'm not for it.
Well, actually, Vivek, that's not the case.
It's better to have some crime in the society than put all the citizens, under a watch all the time.
It's not meant for the generals, for the citizens. Actually, the database is for the offenders, for the convicts, and for those who are accused of some crime. It's not like an Aadhaar card. It doesn't apply to citizens. So that's a different thing. But
that's a different conversation. I'm going to let Mr. Keshav Kumar speak. Mr. Kumar?
Yeah, actually,
add to this discussion.
This issue of preserving the DNA for future references and creating a bank, all those things. There is a very good technology which I would like to let all the people know here, including Dr. Sehjpal. He was mentioning about the case in which they have the database, but the accused is not found. A new technology has come up. Earlier, it used to be called 2D molecular photo fitting, in which from a speck of any body fluid, the DNA is developed, and through that technology, the 2D photograph of the face emerges out. Now, with the convergence of the 3D technology, the whole face can be made like a mannequin. So why not use such technologies? I would request Anita to kindly import this technology in India also, so that all such cases in which the DNA profile is there, but the person is not traceable. So at least we will have one small step through which we can possibly identify that person, because we'll be having a 3D molecular. For these people, kindly Google 3D molecular photo fitting. This is the technology going on in USA. It's in the advanced stage, and I wish, like the DNA technology, which earlier used to take 6 months and used to cost hell of a lot of money. Today, with the rapid HT machine and all, you can develop DNA fingerprinting in 1.5 hours. So a time will come when this 3D molecular photo fitting will be much easier to obtain and much cheaper to use. So kindly visit this, and I would request
Right.
Amrita to kindly.
Sir, I would like to add something to this. I would like to add something to this.
Yes, Dr. Sejpal.
I would like to add something to this, since actually this is basically generating the phenotype from the DNA. So at the moment also there are certain phenotypic markers available as far as the DNA is concerned. But the problem is, whenever you need to develop a technology, it has to be country specific. So at the moment, like, because we have been adopting technology from the West, so they have in their DNA, they have markers in their kits, they have markers which indicate the phenotypes. So like the eye color, like the hair color, the skin color, skin tones, those things can be found out with help of those phenotypes. But what is the problem is, like if you talk of Europe or USA, you will get different type of hair colors, different type of eye shades. Whereas if you talk to India, only two type of hair color, like the brown and the black, and eye shades are also basically two. So rarely in western part of India, say Rajasthan or Punjab or Kashmir, you get few different type of eye shades. So as said, the technology which is standardized by the West doesn't work very nicely as far as our country is concerned. So what I mean to say is, if we cannot develop the same technology within our country for our people based on our phenotypes and our genotypes, that is the need of the hour, rather than simply importing it from side. So another thing I would like to add over is, even if the talk of the DNA identification kits, the global filer, the identifier, these are all the kits which are basically coming from the US or Germany. So till now, we have not developed a kit of our own country. We have not even identified the markers which can work specifically for a country. The countries like China, they have done their own kits. They have their specific markers. So we at FSL Himachal Pradesh, we are trying to work in that direction. We have identified certain markers which are more specific to Indian population, rather than blindly following their kits. So I think those that research also needs to be done, and government has to pump in some funding into that direction, so that we don't mimic the technology, we create the technology. That is what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you to Dr. Sejpal, to Mr. Vivek Sood, to Mr. Keshav Kumar, to Kamal Manwani, and of course to Arnita, who is putting all of this together, has put so much work and effort into this. We will come back to you for final comments, but before that, we have a quiz for our audience. So let's get going with that. So this is a fastest finger first quiz. Whoever clicks the right answer first wins. The first question: in a sexual offense and rape case, one of the below might be considered as the most conclusive evidence to convict the offender: statement of eyewitness in court, survivor's statement to the police, forensic DNA evidence found at the scene of the crime matching with the suspect's profile, and past criminal record of the offender. That's your first question. Whoever clicks first wins a prize. Let's move on to the next question. The second question: what is the estimated annual volume of DNA tests done for crime cases in India? Less than 30,000, more than 60,000 but less than 80,000, more than 1 lakh but less than 2 lakh, or more than 3 lakhs? The first person to click gets the prize. And let's move on to the next question. As per NCRB data from 2018, what are the chances that the offender is known to the rape survivor? Less than 20%, almost 50%, exactly 80%, or at least 94%. Next question. How many countries till date have adopted the DNA National Offender Database? Only the UK and the US, 30 countries across the globe, 70 plus countries by now, including Bangladesh, and widely adopted by over 80 countries. That's the fourth question. Moving on to the last question. Well, this is your last chance to win that prize. A national DNA database can help track what from the list below? Every citizen's profile, a person's health condition, a citizen's wealth status, and repeat offenses. And that's it for our fastest finger first quiz. The results will be declared on the Facebook page. We will give you a quick link to that. Please follow the Facebook page. The results will be announced on that. A reminder once again to join us in the process of spreading awareness. Please use this hashtag DNA Fights Rape. Please tag the various profiles which were shown to you there. And you can, as I said, follow any of those profiles on Instagram, Twitter, or on Facebook, and log on to Facebook to get the results of the winners. The 5 people who will win will be getting an absolutely wonderful prize. It is a book that they will be getting, written by the Additional Solicitor General, Pinky Anand, and they'll all be getting a copy of this book. So if you answered it 5 times, then you're getting a copy of the book. It's called Trials of Truth, India's Landmark Criminal Cases. Of course, everyone who has attended this session will be getting a participation certificate. All audience members will be receiving digital participation certificates signed by the organizers from GTH as well as from Ogilvy. Now, remember, the most important part of this is the campaign itself. It's to spread awareness. So quick reminder about that.
You've taken a black and white challenge. You've accepted a selfie dare. You've made your profile red, rainbow, even black. Now, take up a challenge that makes a real difference. In India, 4 rapes happen every year. People look away every year. Let's put a stop to that. Help DNA put the rapist behind bars. Help DNA stop rape. Only then will we be free from the fear, from the terror. That will be real independence. So this 15th August, let's support DNA testing and pledge to make India rape-free. I've done it. It's your turn.
So please join all of us and pledge to make India rape-free. Be part of the movement. Save the evidence. And really, as I think all of our panelists have made evident today, they are a part of a larger ecosystem, but the ecosystem starts with you. And it's your responsibility to spread this word, to use this hashtag, to go on social media, and to make everyone aware. Save the evidence. The only way to make India rape-free is to ensure that rapists get convicted and put behind bars. You can also contact Utkarsh and Ashish. Their email addresses are given here for any more information that you would want about this campaign and about what is being done to spread this message far and wide. A toolkit will also be shared in the chat box, which you can access, and it'll give you more information if you want to take this project forward. So it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation with really interesting points being made by all of our panelists. I would like to thank all of you, but before I let you go, I would like one line from all of you about the future as you see it, as far as ensuring justice in sexual assault and rape cases is concerned, the use of technology. Tell us, what's the future like? Mr.
I think you need to repeat. I think there was some difficulty in the audio. You need to repeat the question.
Yeah.
My question is, before we wrap it up, I would like everyone to give me one line about where you see the future of technology, of human behavior, of all of these things, where is the future of ensuring justice to sexual assault and rape survivors? How do we ensure that we become a rape-free nation? What is the vision that you have for the future? Mr. Keshav Kumar.
More forensics.
Mr. Sood.
I think DNA evidence is the future of sexual assault cases.
Dr. Sahajpal.
I guess in addition to DNA forensics, a total change in the attitude of the society is also required.
Kamal Manwani.
Yeah, DNA forensics and changing the mindset can make rape unthinkable for the society.
Arnita.
The role of common people as first-line responders in expediting justice, that's where it is.
And there you have it, a combination of technology and sensitization. That is the future. Thank you so much, students of Bharati Vidyapeeth, as well as everyone else who've joined us. Thank you so much to our panelists for joining us. And of course, a special thank you to Arnita for endlessly pursuing this goal.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kajori, and thanks everyone, in the panel. So privileged to have you here. I'm sure that the audience has benefited hugely from, this discussion. And I'm also sure that they still have many questions. I can still see a lot of questions there. So probably it'll be good for you to kind of reach out to us. And if you would like, our experts to, kind of respond to you with some of those, questions that you still have, we'll be happy to assist with that. And I would like to thank Bharati Vidyapeeth College and also the Literary Council. It's great to have your support, and I would really kind of urge you to share this information with as many networks and people that you want should be aware of this. I think that will help make the change. Well, thank you so much for being with us. Wonderful.